Okay, I told you that this week on our relationship series, we come to everybody's favorite topic, and that is getting into a relationship in early recovery too quickly. So I realize that what I'm going to say tonight, for some of you that are already in a relationship or you've been married for years, you're going to go, yawn, this doesn't apply to me. But just listen. You might take the odd nap through my talk, but you might pick up a few things. Why I want to talk about it is this. Over the last 15 years, as I've worked in recovery, I would say that this getting into a relationship too soon has been the biggest cause of relapse that I have seen. And most people don't go into the relationship planning to relapse. They go into the relationship thinking that their life is better than ever. It's not the first week or the first month or the first couple months. It's after that where it starts going south in a hurry and they end up relapsing. So it is a very big issue. Part of the problem for many people is that they're already in a relationship that isn't good and they don't know what to do. So we're going to talk about that in one of the weeks in the near future. And for other people, they are just confused about relationships in general, about how to go about even starting a relationship, and we're going to talk about that one as well. But what I want to say tonight is the other thing I've experienced in my years of counseling is this is the one area where clients don't listen to me. They all of a sudden think they're smarter than me, and in all other areas they think I'm really smart, except this one, and they don't listen to advice very well. So I tell you that up front because what I want you to see is when you fall in love, quote unquote, you put on rose-colored glasses, blinders, denial, all kinds of things, and so do your best to really listen and just pretend I do know what I'm talking about in this area. Then I want to say this. I am not going to say tonight that it is impossible to have a relationship or start a relationship when you're in recovery and have it succeed. What I will say, though, is it's almost impossible for it to succeed. In all my years, I don't know that I have seen one success story where somebody has started in early recovery and that relationship has grown and become a healthy, long-lasting relationship. So that is just to help you say there's a lot of evidence for what I'm saying, that this is a very difficult thing to accomplish. Now let me say one other thing. Most of your 12-step groups, they'll say no relationships for a year. And people come to me and they complain and whine. Why do they say that? And I go, okay, let me put it to you this way. What happens to a lot of people is they don't have a relationship for 5 years and they go, good, I am ready for a relationship, let's go. And it blows up in their face. And I say, it doesn't matter if it's 1 year or 5 years, that's not the issue. The issue has, have you been dealing with your stuff and getting healthy? Because if you haven't, you can wait 10 years and all you're going to be for somebody is a dry drunk. It is not going to be a good relationship. So don't focus on the time thing. Focus on, am I working on myself? Now I say that because of this. A healthy relationship only happens if both people in the relationship are working on their issues. If one is and the other isn't, it won't work. If neither is, it won't work. A healthy relationship requires both people working on themselves. But coming out of complex trauma, you have so many issues that you got to work on them for a while before you're healthy enough to even begin a relationship. Now, some of you that have been around the block a few times are going to nod your head all night at what I'm saying and elbow the young person beside you because you know You have to work on your stuff, and it takes a while before you are healthy enough and strong enough to be able to handle an intimate relationship. So let me begin with this. Why do people go into a relationship too quickly? Why do they put on their blinders, rose-colored glasses, and ignore all the red flags? Let me give you a bunch of reasons. Number one of the things that happens for many in early recovery is they have a deep loneliness. So you come into recovery, you got to say goodbye to all your using friends. Sometimes you got to put up boundaries with your family because they're toxic. And all of a sudden you realize, I'm all by myself. I've cut out everybody that's toxic in my life, and that's everybody. Now I don't have anybody in my life who's somewhat healthy. And so you have to sit in this lonely period as you begin building, hopefully, healthy friends. Well, we're not very good at sitting in uncomfortable emotions. And so that loneliness, for many people, they end up in a relationship. Now, here's one little glitch that I want you to catch in your thinking. Most people, when they're lonely, they don't go, I need a good friend of the same gender so I can have a good friend. They go, I need a romantic relationship. That's what solves my loneliness. That usually will be a disaster, but that's typically where your brain goes when you're lonely. Secondly, we've talked about over and over again that the deepest issue that comes out of complex trauma is this shame that says, the reasons my parents abused me, neglected me, abandoned me, is I must not be good enough, I must not be lovable, I must not be valuable. And that's the shame belief. Now, if you go with that, what you then do is develop an equation in your brain that goes like this. How can I prove to myself that I'm lovable? Well, somebody must want to be in a relationship with me. If somebody wants to be in a relationship with me, that proves I'm lovable. Therefore, solution, I must be in a relationship all the time. Because if I'm not in a relationship, then that means nobody presently wants me, and that means I must not be lovable. So therefore, get in a relationship. So if you don't deal with shame, you will constantly be vulnerable to jump into relationships with somebody that gives you attention. And that's why for many people from complex trauma, ever since their teens, they've always been in a relationship. Some, when they realize a relationship is falling apart, they don't end it till they have somebody else to move to. So that they always are moving to a relationship. Next thing that comes out of complex trauma and shame is that your deepest need to be loved and validated was not met. And you didn't feel connected. You didn't feel intimacy. Many of you have pushed that down, and you have denied that you even care if anybody loves you. You deny that you even feel a longing for love or validation. But the reality, it's still there. And it is there in an accentuated way when you didn't get it met in childhood. It's now even stronger than that of a child who was loved unconditionally in childhood. So what you have to be prepared for, once you start letting yourself feel, which hopefully you are doing in recovery, is that all of a sudden you feel this longing to be loved, a longing to be validated, a longing to connect. And that causes many to seek out a romantic satisfaction of that. And then a subtle one that many aren't even aware of, but you can factor it into your computer now. There is built into us a desire for stability and security. Now, if you're a single parent, your life all depends on you. You have to be on your game 24/7. All the bills are on your shoulders. Everything is dependent on you. And often without realizing it, there's something inside of you that goes, I just wish I had somebody else who would be my rock. I just wish I had somebody else I could lean on once in a while when I feel overwhelmed. I wish I had stability in a greater way. And that makes many attracted to the strong, silent type, because they look like rocks. Often they aren't, but that's what you get drawn to, and that can be a problem for many people. Next one, when you got out of addiction, you said, no more drugs, alcohol, done. But now you're starting to feel those feelings. And a lot of them are painful. And your brain is saying, I don't like feeling these feelings. I need to medicate them. And you go, well, we're not going to drugs, we're not going to alcohol. Then the brain says, okay, find me a distraction. Or find me a drug that's not drugs and alcohol. And so what happens for a lot of people when they get all of these emotions that they don't like sitting in and they don't know what to do with, they find a distraction called a relationship. And that becomes their new drug of choice. Next one. Over the years, I've talked, well, probably it makes some of you blush, but I talked to almost everybody, women included, about sex, their sex life, their sex drive, and I get told stuff that might curl your hair and make you turn red. But I just kind of go with it. But here's kind of the thinking in our culture today. I can have a one-night stand, and it's not a big deal. And I have asked people point blank, once they trust me and I get to know them, how powerful is sex? Can you really just have a one-night stand? And almost all of them have said back, sex is a lot more powerful than we give it credit for. It creates feelings. And so what happens in early recovery, you go, I'm not going to get in a relationship, but I'm going to have all my one-night stands lined up. And before you know it, you're starting to get feelings, and you're in a relationship because you're having sex together and developing feelings. And that is an issue that many people don't honestly factor in to their thinking. And then the other reason is this. In recovery, there's a lot of people without very good boundaries. And so they can say, you want to go out for coffee or you want sex? And you say no, and your no to them means try harder. It doesn't mean no. And so they keep hounding you and you give in. And you say, okay, one coffee and that's it. What you just said to that person is you won. You just keep trying harder and I'll do whatever you want. And because they're not good at saying no and enforcing it, a pushy person pushes into their life, and before you know it, they're in a relationship. So those are all kinds of different reasons. Some of them you've experienced, some you've watched others go through. But now let me take you to the next part or problem that then goes with this. Once you develop feelings, the brain's denial system starts to kick in. And part of that denial system is rationalization. So I have heard this thousands of times, and it goes, Tim, I've met a friend, and we're just friends. And we're just going to stay friends. And I internally roll my eyes and go, right. But in their mind, they're justifying the relationship by saying we're just friends. And that often is dishonesty, or they say we're friends and we're going to go really slow. And what that simply means is instead of hopping into bed after the first night, we're going to wait till 2 weeks. That's slow. And that can be a problem. So be aware of the little lies that you tell yourself to justify the friendship. And then, I've heard this many, many times, hundreds of times, and it goes like this. Tim, I am in a relationship, or I met a person, and they don't have any complex trauma. And they are the healthiest person I have ever met in my life. And internally I roll my eyes again. And 3 months later they come back and they go, that is the most complex trauma devil I have ever met. So when people say I've got a partner who is super healthy, and I know they got complex trauma and are super unhealthy, I go, okay, that might need another consideration down the road. But that is another problem that many have. And then, a danger, many people with complex trauma, you coped as a child by escaping to a fantasy world. Guess what gets triggered when you meet somebody that seems like Prince Charming? A fantasy world. And you can go into your fantasy world, and what you fall in love with is not the person, but your fantasy of the person. And that is a big difference, which time will show how far apart your fantasy version is from the real person. But that is another danger. And then, I love asking this once in a while to newer clients. What are your criteria for checking or for looking for a girlfriend or a boyfriend? So I listed the 3 top criteria. Hot, good in bed, and good chemistry. And I like to just say, do you think that's going to make a real healthy, long-lasting relationship? You know what I found out? They never thought that far ahead. All they're thinking about is instant gratification. And so if we're going to do this properly, we got to come up with the right criteria for finding a person who will be a healthy person that we can have a healthy, intimate relationship. And we're going to spend a night on that. Okay. So now, some of you are going to say, I'm still not convinced that it's a problem. So let me give you some of the results of getting into a relationship too quickly. Number 1, whether you like it or not, it will distract you potentially with a great deal of probability from your recovery focus. So what happens when a person comes into recovery? They just had a terrible bottom and they're desperate to get clean. Nothing distracts them. I have to go to my meeting. I don't care if it's minus 40 out and a foot of snow. I have got to get to a meeting. And I got to do my meditation in the morning. I got to do some journaling. I got to talk to a sponsor. And they are focused. And they say no to friends that want to go out for coffee that they know they just don't have time for. Then they fall in love. Well, maybe I'll miss tonight's meeting because they want to go to a movie with me. And all of a sudden, your priorities start changing. And so, priority number 1 used to be recovery, and within that, I got to be spiritually fit. I got to be emotionally fit. I got to be taking care of myself physically. That's got to be my priorities. Now it's relationship, then recovery. And that is a recipe for failure. But that easily happens without you realizing it. Next thing. A relationship releases 2 brain chemicals. Oxytocin and dopamine. Guess what alcohol and drugs release? Dopamine. And so when you get in a relationship without planning it or realizing it, you have released addiction chemicals in your brain again. And so for many people, without realizing it, they cross-addict. They go from their old drug of choice to their new drug of choice, who's a whole lot better looking, and you like that. But it sets up, without realizing it, all the brain chemistry stuff that puts you back into addictive behavior and addictive thinking. And many aren't aware that that's happening until it's too late. And then, sadly, and some of you won't like hearing this, but many studies have been done of people with complex trauma and lots of shame. And the studies started because they saw something that said people with lots of shame tend to be attracted to people with lots of shame. People who have been abused tend to be attracted to abusers. People who are really messed up tend to be attracted to really messed up. It's like it's normal. It's their attraction. And so what I have done over the years is just say, is this research true? And my experience and what I've witnessed says, yes, it's true. Shame-based people are attracted to shame-based people. So, if you haven't dealt with your shame, you'll be attracted to somebody with issues. They might respond to their issues differently than you, so you don't think they have the same issues till you get to know them better. But you will be attracted to somebody with the same complex trauma shame recipe. You want to know something else is interesting? Young people with mommy issues or daddy issues tend to be attracted to mommy issue, daddy issues. And some of you have been through that. Okay, next one. Shame produces this thinking, and here's how I explain it. A healthy person walks around and says, I'm a T-bone steak. No better than that. I'm sirloin steak. Shame says, I'm nothing but a bit of chopped liver. So if you walk around thinking you're chopped liver, and there's a nice steak walking around, you're going to say, they would never want me. They want another steak. And so guess who are you going to be content or settle for? Another piece of chopped liver. And so that's part of what happens is shame-based people, if they haven't dealt with their shame, they think nobody healthy would ever want them. And so they just look for other chopped liver. And then what happens with chopped liver is, I don't think I'll get true love, but I'll be content to get a few crumbs of love every once in a while. So you settle for what you don't deserve, but you think you deserve. Next one. Let's say you get into this relationship. All of a sudden now, when you get into an intimate relationship, your deepest complex trauma issues will get triggered. And that means all your deepest fears and insecurities. So you could have been going into recovery and dealing with stuff and thinking, I'm doing really well. I'm growing, I feel it. Then you get in a relationship and all of a sudden this insane jealousy takes over. And you become a control freak. And you're manipulating again. You go, where did that come from? That's just because your deepest insecurity got triggered. And what a lot of people aren't prepared for is you can be doing lots of work, but once you get in an intimate relationship, it triggers deep stuff that you might not even have known was there. And it can be a disaster. And that means then, it doesn't mean you're not growing. It means to have a healthy relationship, you have to be strong enough to handle those deep triggers. You got to be strong enough to enforce boundaries. Because what will happen if you get somebody, let's say, with the same shame, they're going to get jealous too. They're going to get controlling too. And then they're going to say, you sure you got to go to as many meetings? Let me help you with your recovery at home. You sure you need those friends? I don't like that you're out with so many friends. Why don't we just spend more time together? Why do you have to phone that person every day? And they start trying to cut the important people out of your life. And if you're not strong enough to stick to your boundaries and say, no, I need them, if you don't like it, bye-bye, you'll give in. And before you know it, you'll be in big trouble. Next one. You go into a relationship and everybody's on their best behavior, best foot forward. And you think, we've never had a fight. We get along. We have so much in common. That's a lie that only lasts so long. Because conflict will come. And conflict is another powerful trigger of anger, of all kinds of nasty things. And if you're not ready for that, it can send you downhill in a big hurry. And then we've talked about the fantasy issues. And then the next one is, it does tend to go faster than you thought. Now here's 2 reasons why. And it's really, I think, important to understand these ones. That brain chemistry of oxytocin. Oxytocin is your limbic brain. It's your emotion brain. It's your child brain. And what it says is this: I feel in love, so it must be love. I feel in love, so it must be true. You don't know anything about love and you don't know them. But it feels like love, so you go with it. And when you are living out of your limbic brain, your thinking brain gets put on a shelf or it gets trumped by your limbic brain. So that's number 1. Number 2, clients say to me all the time, I've started a relationship, we're going slow. And so I ask this: how much are you texting? Oh, every day. How often? Oh, hundreds of times in a day. But we're not seeing each other. We're going slow. I go, what's the difference? And so we live in an age of technology, is my point. And I think it creates extra challenges today about going slow. Because it is easy to maintain constant communication with a person and not see them. But by maintaining constant communication, you're feeding the oxytocin. You're keeping the chemical pumping in your brain, which makes it harder and harder to go slow. So be aware of that. So what I say to people is this: if you're really wanting to go slow, you not only have to have boundaries about how often to see each other, you got to have boundaries around texting, phone calls, Facebook, all of that, because it all plays into it. And then the next one, sex too soon. We've talked about that. Next one, you go in and you put your best foot forward, but guess what you're doing? You're putting a mask back on. You're saying, I can't be totally real. I got to be happy all the time. I got to stuff my anger, stuff my sadness. And guess what? You're disconnecting. You're going back into complex trauma behavior. And that is always dangerous. And that's why relapse is often just around the corner. Let me go to how do we grow in this area? How do we change? So very, very quickly, let me say again to start off. You can't have an intimate relationship just because you want one. You can only have an intimate relationship if both people are mature enough to handle an intimate relationship. And it takes a level of maturity that people from complex trauma don't naturally have. And so they have to work on themselves The other person has to work on themselves to grow to a point of maturity until they are ready for that. And that really is what recovery is about. Recovery is not just about not drinking or using. Recovery is about getting healthy. And so if you're serious about that, that is great, and that needs to be the focus for quite a while, is just getting yourself healthier, and you're just not ready for the other stuff, a relationship. Next thing, when the loneliness hits, find a good friend. Gradually build a non-romantic. Now, let's say you're heterosexual, find somebody of your gender. So you're not going to get tempted romantically. And begin building just friendship. So here's what I want you to understand. Complex trauma doesn't just mess up romantic relationships. It messes up any type of friendship. So you might have lots of casual friends in the past, but you probably never have had a truly healthy, close friend. That's where you can start to work. And it'll give you tools that will help you later with a romantic relationship, and it will help you now to build friendships and meet some of that loneliness need. So start there. Secondly, find a good mentor. Here's why I say that. I've had a couple people in their life come to me and say, I can't trust myself as to when I'm ready for an intimate relationship. You know me very well. You know my recovery. You know my issues. You know what I've worked on, what I need to work on. If I'm attracted to somebody else, I'm going to come to you, and I want you to honestly tell me if I'm ready or not. Now, did you hear only a couple people have done that? Because that's scary. Because all of a sudden, Tim has this extra power to make my life miserable. So you'd have to trust me, number one. But if it's not me, find somebody that knows you, that's somewhat healthy, that you can trust with that. Next, learn self-control. All of this is about patience. All of this is about saying no to your limbic brain and saying, shut up for a while and just sit in the back seat, because you're not getting the steering wheel just yet. That's hard, and that is so important, but so hard. Let me give you this. Complex trauma says, opportunity for instant gratification, grab it. What I am saying is opportunity for instant gratification, wait. Don't feed it. You want to know what will happen? Most of those attractions will disappear. When I was in university, I knew that I would get attracted to a bunch of different people, so I made a little deal with myself. If I get attracted to a girl, I will not act on it. I won't even say hi to her, nothing for 1 month. If the attraction's still there, then I'll say hi. You want to know what happened? After 1 month, I wasn't attracted to one of those girls. They all passed. And that often happens. So sit in it, don't feed it, and you'll be surprised how it fades away and you begin to go, that person's a jerk. And I'm glad I didn't follow up on that. Again, it all means sitting in some uncomfortable emotions, not running to get rid of them, and then when you're getting to the point where you're ready, and your mentor says, yeah, I think you're ready, sit down and carefully think through healthy boundaries. How fast is this going to go? Will depend on boundaries I set around how often we see each other, when we allow physical, how often we text, what kind of things we talk about. You have to be prepared to begin thinking through the finer points of boundaries. And then, some of you are saying, that talk tonight was great, but it was way too late. I'm in a relationship. What do I do? We're going to have a night on that. Part 2, 3, whatever. So let me just give you, here's your options. Number 1, you can end it. Number 2, you can take a break for a while, reassess, focus on yourself. Number 3, you can get help and hopefully repair it and heal and both grow. That's kind of your 3 options. Most people, they know this isn't just like what color of socks am I going to wear in the morning. It's not that kind of decision. This is a huge decision. It affects the kids. It affects all kinds of things. So I don't want to make it foolishly. I want to make sure I've thought it through carefully. And I agree. It is a big decision. It's an important one. And there's lots of stuff that has to be thought through, which we'll come to another night. So for the Christian part, we've been, with this relationship series, really focusing on this relationship with God. And why I wanted to do that is because, in my experience, again, many people that I deal with have had a bunch of different things happen to them when it comes to this whole God thing. If they were raised around Christianity or had church experience of some kind, often they experience spiritual abuse. And we'll explain that in detail over our time together in the future, but it's a big type of abuse. And that's where if you don't do this, God's going to punish you. And so it becomes a fear-based type of religion. And that does a lot of damage. And it leads to a very distorted view of God, that God's this angry, distant person that you always have to try to please. And then others, they have problems with, I've messed up so much, I just can't accept that God forgives me and that He loves me. I just think I've messed up too much. So I wanted to do this because for a lot of people, this is a big hurdle for them to get over. And so when we started this, we talked about the Beatitudes, Jesus' first sermon. And that's where He explains how to have a relationship with God. But He doesn't do it in terminology that is used today in most churches. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this part, but I just want you to think about it. If you were to go to most churches today and ask them, how do you have a relationship with God? They would say, pray and ask Jesus into your heart. Do you realize that's not taught in the Bible anywhere? Do you realize Jesus never proposed that as the way to have a relationship with God? What He said is you got to be poor in spirit, you got to mourn, you got to be meek, and you got to hunger and thirst for righteousness. If you didn't get it, you can go back to the first relationship DVD online and watch that. Then we tied that into step 3 of the 12 steps, which says I turn my will and my life over to God. And we said that's what those first 4 Beatitudes are saying, is you turn your will and your life over to God. So what I thought to do tonight is to say, what else does the Bible say about how to have a relationship with God, or how does it define a relationship with God? So I want to give you 5 different metaphors that it uses to describe a relationship with God. Some of them you will have heard, but not in kind of how they were intended to be taught. So the first one is the fear of the Lord. So in the book of Proverbs, it says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And then it says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of righteousness or godliness. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of a relationship with God. Now, if you grew up in some churches, they talked about the fear of the Lord a lot because what they said was you should be afraid of God. And it supported their fear-based religion, where we're going to motivate you by keeping you afraid of God. Do you realize that that is not what that meant? Let me give it to you this way. On the day I said my wedding vows, 30-some years ago, I said to my wife, I loved you. Do you know what I could have said that would have said exactly the same thing? I fear you. Here's what it meant in that culture, in that time. To fear somebody simply meant, I give you the most weight in my life. And I put you in the highest place in my affections. That's the two things that are involved in fearing. And so what it is saying to my wife is, I'm not just going to say on our wedding day, I love you more than any other human being. We're going to have lots of times where other people want my attention, business wants my attention, and lots of things are going to try to take your place in my affections. But I'm not going to let anything else take your place in my affections. And then we're going to face decisions. And I'm going to have my mom and your mom yapping in my ear, wanting to have the most weight in my life. But you're going to get the most weight in my life when it comes to making decisions. Your input, your advice, I will listen to more than anybody else's because I fear you. So fear is actually a term of adoration. And so what God is simply saying is love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. How do you have a relationship with God? You live to fear Him. Now, you're going to see none of these we do perfectly. I fear God most of the time in my life, but I still have times I listen to others more than God. So what He's not saying is do this with perfection. He's saying this should be the pattern of your life. That you should be growing to give God the highest place in your affection and the highest place in what carries weight in your decision making and your thinking. That's the fear of the Lord. So love the Lord your God with all your heart. Next one. And I put a picture here just so you'd understand it. That's a yoke, okay? Why I did this is because I had a lot of younger people, and I've taught this before, go, what's a yoke? Are you talking about the yolk of an egg? And I go, no, it's not the yolk of an egg. This is a yoke, Y-O-K-E. And it's oxen. So there's two ox linked together by this wooden structure so that they work in tandem together. Now here's what Jesus said in Matthew. He said, take my yoke upon you, let me teach you, and when you do, you will find rest for your souls. So he started by saying, come to me all who are weary and laid down with burdens, and the solution is take my yoke upon you. Now I've never been in a yoke. I can just imagine. That sounds very restrictive to me. So if you picture yourself in a yoke, you're wanting to go this direction, they're wanting to go that direction, you're both pulling in different directions, and it gets to be nothing but conflict and frustration. So what Jesus is really saying is, get in a yoke with me where you let me be the lead oxen. You follow my lead. What's that sound like? You fear me. You give me the highest place of weight in your life. So you surrender to me. That's step 3. Turn your will and your life over. You surrender to me. That's meekness. Placing yourself. It's that little jockey on a great big powerful horse. And all that power surrenders to that little jockey. That's what he's talking about. Get in the yoke with me and let me lead. Now that is surrender. That's not popular. What does our culture say? The way to happiness is be your own boss. You want to know what I am thankful for about addiction? You tried being your own boss and you pushed that as far as it could go, and you ended up a slave to your darkest desires. So being your own boss does not lead to happiness. It might lead to instant pleasure once in a while. It doesn't lead to long-term happiness. What Jesus is saying is this is a paradox. This doesn't sound like a recipe for happiness, but the true recipe for happiness is getting in a yoke for me, with me, let me lead, surrender to me, and guess what? You'll find rest. Life will actually get easier. You want to know the most miserable people I know? Christians in disobedience. Because they're yanking on that yoke and Jesus is trying to pull them back in line and they're exhausted. They can't sleep at night. Surrender. Then the next one even gets more specific in this area. Paul said over and over again, I am a bond slave of Jesus. What is he saying? Everybody will surrender to some authority. That's the way we're wired. As the singer sang, you got to serve somebody. It could be the devil or it will be the Lord, but you got to serve somebody. And he's recognizing that we will serve somebody. And so our options are this. You can serve God, or you can follow your own desires, which will lead serving your darkest desires, which will result in slavery. Or you can follow some other person, and that won't work either, because they're not going to lead you with perfect wisdom and perfect knowledge of you and perfect love for you. So the solution, the way to happiness, is surrender to me and serve me. That, again, sounds like a recipe for disaster, but it is a path to true joy. But here's the kick. You got to trust. So surrender, the recipe for true happiness, requires trusting this God. And I'm going to talk about that next week because it's such a big thing. Then it goes another metaphor that says the same thing, on a narrow road. So Jesus said, enter in at a narrow gate and walk on a narrow road. It says lots of people go through a broad gate, a wide gate, and walk a wide road. It looks like happiness. You can do whatever you want, but it leads to emptiness, pain, and destruction. What's he saying? To follow me means you live on a narrow road which has two guardrails. My design, my boundaries for happiness, for a healthy life. My boundaries around food. My boundaries around sex. My boundaries around relationships. My boundaries around entertainment and pleasure. God says, I want you to enjoy all these pleasurable gifts, but they're only going to remain pleasurable if you stay within the boundaries. Soon as you step outside of those boundaries, it all is going to start falling apart and getting empty and painful. Now, if you grew up in church, you heard this word called sin. And it was always, oh, big bad word. Do you want to know what sin means? Stepping outside of a boundary. Any unhealthy behavior leads to emptiness and pain. So any unhealthy behavior is outside of the boundaries. So don't reduce your definition of sin to the big three, sex and all of that stuff. It's any unhealthy behavior. So Jesus is saying, happiness is a narrow road. You're kind of locked in by his boundaries of happiness. And healthy, and you can say, I don't like it, and step outside and you go, I'm free. No, you're not. You're going to become a slave, and it's all going to fall apart. So true happiness is a narrow road. Last one, cornerstone. So Jesus said in his ministry over and over again, I am the head of the corner, or the chief cornerstone. And that is really significant to understand. And it's, again, a metaphor. In that culture, more than we have today, if you're going to build a new house, you would spend days and days looking for a cornerstone. And the cornerstone would go and be the first stone laid. And it'd be the corner. And you would want to make sure it was exactly 90 degrees. Because you imagine if you had a cornerstone where it was 95 degrees, that wall is not going to match that wall over there. And it would have to be straight up and down vertical. If it was on a bit of a slant, your house ain't going to be very reliable. So everything was lined up with the cornerstone. Everything, measurements, angles was taken from the cornerstone. And it was only if you had the right cornerstone that you would get the right house. If you had a faulty cornerstone where the angles were off and you lined everything up, it wouldn't matter. You would still have a house that would fall down because your cornerstone wasn't right. So Jesus is saying this: the most important decision in your life is your cornerstone. Or another way to say it, the most important person in your life is who you're going to fear the most. Because then you make every decision in your life line up with that cornerstone. And if you got the wrong one, you could have some movie star that's hot and line up your life with him, and it's going to fall apart. So Jesus is saying, number one, choose the right cornerstone, and I'm really the best one. And secondly, line up your life with me. So here's what I want you to get the big picture of. How does a person have a relationship with God? Yes, there's initial decision, but that's not the focus of anything of what Jesus teaches. He's not just saying make a decision and you're good. He's saying make a decision that will affect your entire life from now on. Where from now on, you get in a yoke. From now on, you're a slave. From now on, you walk a narrow path. From now on, you line up every corner of your life to be in line with that cornerstone. And you put him in your highest place of affection, and he carries the most weight in all your decision making. Then you got a relationship with God. Isn't that interesting? It's all there. We don't teach much of it in our culture today, but that's what it's about. And so bottom line, none of us are going to do this perfectly. And that's why God makes this all about grace. We can't earn it. We just keep working at walking closer to Him, staying in the yoke without fighting too much, surrendering, lining up our life. Then it gets out of whack. We reline it up and we reline it up. And God says, that's okay. Just keep on. And before you know it, what begins to happen is that relationship feels like a friendship. And that relationship is not just somebody I want to line my life up with, it's somebody I trust. And somebody that means more to me than anything else in the world. Then you got a truly intimate relationship. It's a process, doesn't happen overnight. We're all on the journey. God knows it and accepts it. And that's the beauty of it. He's gracious to wherever we're at. Let's start there.